All right, so tonight we're looking at part 37 of our Wild Harvest Edibles series. And as we always start off, just a reminder that as you navigate any health challenge, it's always recommended that you partner with a medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of care of the human body in disease and in health. And understand that may be becoming more and more difficult to do, but it's still something we should strive for. Information shared here is educational in nature and is simply another tool in your toolbox for maintaining wellness and returning to wellness. So if they've been successfully used by others in similar situations, and just make sure that you always investigate anything that you learn about anywhere, and do your due diligence before implementing it in your own paradigm. Thomas Edison said a long time ago that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patient in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. Now, Thomas Edison wasn't a doctor, he wasn't a physician, but he was a very astute individual who God had given lots of talents for invention. And this is a very astute statement that he made. And unfortunately, mainstream medical practices strayed from this philosophy that is very on target. In fact, we see that target reiterated here in Testimonies for the Church from 1885. There are many ways of practicing the healing art, but there's only one way that heaven approves. God's remedies are the simple agencies of nature that will not tax or debilitate the system through their powerful properties. Pure air and water, cleanliness and a proper diet, purity of life and a firm trust in God are remedies for the want of which thousands are dying. Yet these remedies are going out of date because their skillful use requires work that the people do not appreciate. Fresh air, exercise, pure water, and a clean, sweet premises are within the reach of all, with but little expense. But drugs are expensive, both in the outlay of money as well as the effect produced on the system. And in 3 John 1, verse 2, beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things and be in health, just as your soul prospers. And our souls prospering certainly is a key to health in its own right, but God's desire is for us to have health. And in Romans 12, 1 and 2, we're admonished to present ourselves as living sacrifices, holy and acceptable to God, which is a reasonable service. It's not unreasonable, it's reasonable. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The mind is a powerful thing, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God. So some very biblical, very prophetic, very far-thinking ways of thinking about health and wellness that are important for us to consider today. Our topic tonight is looking at the common flax. So flax itself, Lignum usitaceum, is also known as linseed, has a long history of usage. It's an annual, and it's not typically growing in the wild. It's typically cultivated, but it can be found growing. But it's a common thing that is utilized in a home setting typically. But it also can be easily raised in a small plot kind of situation. So it's used medicinally, used for food. The oil is highly sought after, both from a medicinal standpoint for its high omega-3 content, as well as a lubricant. So linseed oil for wood conditioning and things like that. It has a long history of industrial use, as well as medicinal and culinary use. Also, linen, of course, comes from the flax, and so linen fabric is made up from the fibers of flaxseed or flax plants. So below you see a field of flax. They grow quite tall, 3 to 4 feet at maturity, so that'd be a fun field to run through. It's rarely found growing wild, but it's easy to cultivate. You can just take flaxseed that you buy and sow it, and it should sprout and grow. Has loose clusters of flowers at the top. They're nice blue flowers. It reminds me a little bit of chicory in that regard, but chicory has much smaller flower petals, and actually chicory is in the Asteraceae family. which this is not, but has stalkless leaves that are alternate and erect, and they stand up along the stalk, and there are multiple stalks that emanate from a common base that grows out of the ground. The left picture is a picture of the fruit. So inside those 5-lobed capsules is where the flax seed is matured and then is ready to be harvested. So it's harvested, has multiple uses. You can harvest the seed, and then the long stalks, the fibers of the stalks, are also used for fabric and other usages in addition to that. So from an edibility standpoint, you can eat the sprouts as well as the seeds, and they can be consumed either cooked or raw. The sprouts, if you consume them in quantity, can be constipating, so you don't want to overdo the sprouts. More like alfalfa sprouts as a condiment or in addition to salads, as a sandwich entity, as opposed to being a main meal, but certainly can add quality to that. One of the things that needs to be thought about too is that flax seeds are very, very tough. Chewing them is not going to be very productive. I remember the first time I learned about flaxseed as being a beneficial thing to consume. I took a spoonful of flax and started chewing them, and they just ended up hydrating. They are very mucilaginous, even in just their seed form. Just kind of chewing on them, and they just never really broke down. It just takes a lot of jaw working to get them to break down, because they actually don't release their beneficial properties unless the hull has been broken and is able to release the contents. So typically, you can see the lower right picture, flaxseed meal is the way that it would be consumed. Put that into a small blender crucible and blend it right up so that it chops it right into little bitty pieces, and then that's the best way to actually consume it. Otherwise, what goes in comes out. It doesn't break down. The stomach acids aren't enough to break them down on their own. They'll just pass right through on the stool. So when the seeds are moistened, they become mucilaginous, just like the meal will as well. You can see in the upper right corner a spoon full of flaxseed meal that has been mixed into water, and that makes a mucilaginous mixture, and that mixture can be used for a variety of different things, as an egg replacer, as a thickening agent. It can be used, we'll see, in a medicinal fashion as well. Even can be used as a cereal. It has lots of omega-3 fatty acids in them. The one thing about using flaxseed for omega-3 source is that you would want to grind it, number one, and number two, consume what you've ground almost immediately. And anything left over you to preserve in the refrigerator, but want to use in a timely fashion, because once opened and exposed to the air, it oxidizes and becomes rancid rapidly. Unlike something like chia, so chia seed is even higher in omega-3 than flaxseed. Chia does not have to be broken in order to have the properties of the chia seed be digested and available to the body. And it also doesn't oxidize. It creates a mucilaginous gel just from the seeds as well, but it doesn't require being broken. And they're even smaller. They're like the size of a period. You remember chia seeds. So chia are actually probably a better, more shelf-stable way, easier accessible form of omega-3s, but flaxseed is very common too. Just make sure that when you use it, you're using it right away to avoid rancidity. So when they become rancid, that is basically the breakdown of the fats and other components in the flaxseed that are beneficial. And as they become rancid, they become pro-oxidative. They become oxidative as opposed to antioxidant. They become stress-forming and inflammatory in nature. Many vegetable oils and fats go rancid quite quickly. If you have oil on your shelf that's been sitting there for a while, sometimes it takes a long time to go through a bottle of oil. That oil is very likely going to be rancid. It's better to buy small quantities of oil. And in fact, in our household, we don't really use free oils at all in our cooking. You can saute onions in water. You can do other things to substitute for oil. In fact, many places that call for oil, you don't even have to use oil. It just lowers the amount of free fats and the possibility of rancid fats and inflammation associated with it. So again, sometimes you'll see in the stores that you can buy flaxseed in a bag, flax meal in a bag already done, and I wouldn't do that, because as soon as it is ground up, it begins oxidizing. And if you buy it in a package, it's going to be probably already rancid when you get it, even if you buy it fresh from the store, ground up. So don't buy pre-ground flaxseed meal, because it's going to be rancid. The best thing to do is to grind that yourself, immediately consume it. And if there's anything left, be sure you're using it in a timely fashion. So again, it's a great egg replacer in baking, has good binding qualities associated with it from an edibility standpoint. So medicinally, it's very high in dietary fiber. This is important for maintaining regular bowel movements. And if you have a high whole foods plant-based diet, you're going to have lots of fiber as it is. Someone who is on a less whole foods diet may benefit more from having more dietary fiber in their diets. Essentially, it helps to shepherd toxins and metabolites out of the body, and from that fiber standpoint, and also is high in omega-3 fatty acids. We already talked about making sure that you grind it immediately and use it to avoid rancidity. You can see on the right here both omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. So there's alpha-linolenic acid, alkylsepatinic acid, EPA, and doxyhexanoic acid, or DHA. So we probably heard of DHA or EPAs before. You can see the number 3 at the end there. That is the omega end of that chain. And so counting back, each kink in the chain is where a carbon would be positioned. So at the very end is carbon 1. The upper triangle portion is carbon number 2, and where the double bond is first formed is carbon number 3. Hence the name omega-3 fatty acid. So it's a fatty acid that has a double bond forming first at the 3rd carbon from the end. As compared to an omega-6 fatty acid, again, it's a long linear chain, but those are forming at the 6th carbon in from the end. Omega is the end, alpha and omega, beginning and the end. Omega-6, the 6th carbon of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's where the double bond begins. So that's linoleic acid, La, and arachidonic acid are the omega-6 fatty acids. There's omega-9s and there's other omegas as well. These are the 2 that tend to be more difficult to obtain in the human diet. Omega-6 is actually much easier to obtain. In fact, most people get more omega-6s than they really need. Omega-3s are the ones that are sought after typically. So chia, flaxseed are great sources of omega-3s, and there are other things as well. Some people lean towards fish oil, but the bottom line is that the fish oil is getting their omega-3s from the algae that those fish eat. So it'd be better to go get the algae and be a frontline consumer rather than looking for the mercury in the fish oil. So being at the bottom of the food chain is best. So controlling cholesterol is one aspect of flaxseed that's beneficial. So using the crushed flaxseed every day in a meal can help to lower LDL cholesterol. Basically, it can function as a vehicle for kind of escorting oxidized cholesterol out of the body if it's fresh and it's not inflammatory in nature. If it's rancid, it probably isn't going to work as well. And another way that this works is by substitution for other fiber sources and other fat types, or increasing the ratio of good fats to bad fats. That helps to put it in a positive balance from a cholesterol standpoint. The LDL is low density lipoprotein, which basically means that it's carrying lower amounts of cholesterol through the circulatory system as compared to high density lipoprotein, HDL, which is the quote good cholesterol. And essentially it becomes bad and good when cholesterol is oxidized, which is what happens when cholesterol is put into contact with air. in your circulatory system, in your body. It's not going to be in contact with the air. So anything that you would eat that would have cholesterol in it that is prepared is going to be by definition oxidized. Some of the most oxidized cholesterol forms are things like Parmesan cheese that's been aged in tiny flakes, also the powdered milk in any form. So powdered pancake mix is very highly oxidized cholesterol form. So anything that is of an animal origin, it's going to have cholesterol that you eat, it's going to be oxidized, and that's inflammatory. So steering away from inflammatory sources is a huge component for maintaining wellness. Autoimmune diseases, the flax can be beneficial for helping that, again, with the high omega-3 input into the body. And again, you want to avoid things that are pro-inflammatory. So if you're using flax, use it right away after grinding it. Otherwise, it becomes rancid and becomes pro-inflammatory. So you don't want to do that. It helps to aid regulation of immune response and helps to suppress inflammation. It has neuroprotective effects, antioxidant effects, and can function as a hormone modulator in conjunction with the autoimmune diseases. That's what AI is standing for there, autoimmune diseases. So hormone modulator means that it's going to be upregulating hormones that are needed in a higher activity and downregulating those that are needing to be in a lower activity. So it modulates their activity as opposed to just exciting or just toning down. So immune modulation and any kind of a modulator is healthy when it's functioning properly. It's also helpful for a variety of different respiratory issues. So flax oil aids some respiratory issues. And I found this interesting that it also is helpful in acute respiratory distress syndrome. Anything that's acute has a rapid onset associated with it. But basically the flax oil is anti-inflammatory and can help mitigate coughing, congestion, and sore throats if used in that area. But doesn't sound too far from sudden acute respiratory syndrome, which we're seeing around the world at this time. So acute respiratory distress syndrome doesn't seem too different. So perhaps there's some benefits there associated with our current situation in the world today. Constipation, 2 teaspoons of ground flaxseed each morning with a full 8-ounce glass of water can help the body become more regular. It's a good source of that soluble fiber again. But remember that if you eat too many of the sprouts, you can end up becoming constipated. So there's kind of 2 edges of the same sword that you just need to be aware of. So water itself, just drinking 8 to 10 ounces of water first thing in the morning can simply be a good bowel lubricant as well. So here's kind of a flow chart of pictures that are showing, starting from the flaxseed, you pop that into a little grinder, like a coffee grinder or like a blender with a small crucible. Then you have that flaxseed meal and put a teaspoon into a glass of water and spin that up, stir it in nice and easily, maybe let it set for just a little bit, depending on how thick you like it. The longer you would leave it, the more thick it would become, and it may become a little bit difficult to swallow down. So the sooner you drink it, the more fluid it would be in nature. So just something to keep in mind. A good place to use it as well would be in like smoothies or shakes or green drinks, those kinds of things, as a thickening agent. So another good way to get that flax fiber into your diet. It's also helpful for skin issue. So warm flaxseed that can be used on the warm flaxseed oil on a cotton ball can be applied directly to a number of different affected skin areas like boils. For boils, you'd want to add Lobelia inflata root to the flax oil. So a picture on the far right here is of the Lobelia inflata, the flower, but you want to use that as a direct application or as a poultice on the wound. So various abscesses, herpes, acne, which is a skin blemish from an infected hair follicle or pore, and burns can also benefit from flaxseed oil. So flax is very excellent in inflammatory qualities. when used internally as well as externally. So the picture on the left there shows an old picture of a poultice being formed. So they've taken some flax meal and mixed it with water to give it some consistency and also ability to soak through the poultice. They're making a packet, a poultice packet out of this. They're putting it onto the cloth and then folding the cloth over it, and have some parchment or plastic to put over that and on the outside layer, which put the poultice next to the skin, and then put a cloth over that, and then wrap the plastic or the parchment over the area that you're putting the poultice on. So it's anti-inflammatory in that regard and can help to reduce swelling. Again, a kind of a pen drawing. There's a wound here or an abscess. The poultice is put onto a cotton cloth, and then a wool cloth maybe put over that, and then either tape like Coflex or an ace bandage or any other kind of wrap that would hold it in place could be used. A couple safety pins there if you don't have self-adhering wrap qualities to it. So for skin issues and other types of surface issues, poultices of flaxseed can be used with benefit, either of the meal or of the oil itself. If you're using just the oil, you take a wool pad and let the oil soak in, and then put that over the area to be addressed directly. So it has some hormonal balancing effects. So it's a phytoestrogen, which basically means that it's a estrogen-like effect from plants as opposed to being estrogen, which is an animal hormone. But flax hull lignans, so those are the hulls of the flax, provide those phytoestrogenic effects, and can be very helpful for women that are postmenopausal or having menopause symptoms. It can help reduce those symptoms that can be quite kind of a roller coaster and not necessarily pleasant to experience. There has been some indication of benefits for cancer. Flaxseed itself and the oil can be complementary as well as prophylactic for breast and prostate cancers. It has a PSA lowering effect, which is prostate-specific antigen, and regular users of flaxseed have reduced their breast cancer risk, likely due to the omega-3 qualities that are improved in the diet. And it actually has been shown to reduce and lower the risk of metastasis or spread of cancer throughout the body, and also aids in initiating apoptosis in postmenopausal women, particularly with respect to breast cancer. But apoptosis is the programmed cell death. All cells have a lifespan associated with them. Every tissue has a different lifespan associated with it. Skin cells are very rapid. Every 30 days, you have basically a new layer of skin. Your eyes are also very, very rapid. Your bones, about 10 years to completely replace the cell structure of your bones. So that's good news, because our tissues are constantly repairing and replacing themselves, but various factors, environmental factors, dietary factors, toxin exposure, and various other things can slow that and cause what we call the aging process. Basically, your body's not keeping up with the repair and regeneration capabilities that God has given us. So a poultice base, again, that ground flax and water, kind of make a mush out of it. And it can be a great base for not only in its own right, but adding charcoal to it. So charcoal is a great poultice for removing toxins and poisons from the body, along with the flaxseed. So it just gives it a matrix in which to lie. Smartweed can be used, elm, hops, mullein. So anything that you use as a poultice, you could use the flaxseed mush along with it to aid its application. So when we're looking at the lignans, that's the outer cell of part of the flaxseed. There's a number of different roles and places where they found activity of it. So cell motility and cytoskeletal dynamics are decreased. The cell cycle are downregulated in some various places, so that has various points at which the cell cycle is changed, which can be good when you're looking at disrupting cancer and things like that. Normal healthy cells, it has positive benefits too. Cell growth and differentiation. So this is going to be specifically looking at toxic cells to the body like cancer. Decreases angiogenesis. So angiogenesis is the blood supply to those cancerous tissues in this case. Cell signaling and metabolism, number of different places where that is downregulated. And then we can see that through caspase 3, cleaved PARP, and cytochrome C, we see apoptosis and cell death being increased, and that's specifically targeting cancer cells. So these are different pathways and points in various pathways of cellular biology at which particularly cancer cells can be disrupted in their function by the lignans of flaxseed. Here's an interesting article: Flavonide C glucosides from flax straw extract reduce human breast cancer cell growth in vitro and induce apoptosis. So it's by a number of authors. And basically it's an interesting picture here, looking at the control on the top there, and then 3 different types of linseed or flaxseed extract down the left column in the blue, and in the right column we see the detection of activity that's taking place of apoptosis. So basically cell death is taking place, and you can see that as the concentration increases, you have more cell death. In the control, you see no cell death in the right side. And the very bottom one is a toxic agent to cells that we know, the researchers know, that induces cell death. So that was kind of the test control. So there's the control where there's nothing added, and then there's the one with a known agent that causes cell death. So there's at least 3 different concentrations there of the flaxseed extract that they were using in this research. So there is research out there basically to illustrate the benefits that flaxseed can have. So when harvesting flax, it harvests a lot like wheat. When the fruit is dry and the pods start to split open, then you can harvest it. You can shake it over a sheet and then sift the chaff. You'll have the seeds as well as the flax plants that they can be used for fiber. And you may need to actually crush some seeds along the way too, or the pods, in order to get the seeds to release. You can see that there's golden flax on the right, and then there's your typical brown flax. Both varieties are essentially equivalent. The oil itself, you can see the linseed oil or flaxseed oil there in the center. There's also a very beneficial therapeutic modality, as well as can be used for other things like lubrication. So again, ground flax goes rancid quickly once it's exposed to oxygen. So use it as soon as it's been made. And that's important because it becomes an inflammatory agent once it becomes rancid. So you don't want to expose yourself to that. So grind and crush and use it immediately. It doesn't have any function other than being pretty until it's broken. And then when you're using flaxseed, make sure you hydrate well, so that you have an adequate water component that is with you as you're using flax. So that's looking at our common flax and some of its medicinal and edible usages.